It is your Wednesday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are as well. Good show coming up today. Randy Johnson covers college football, Gophers football for the Star Tribune. Will join me here in just a little while to talk about Gopher football. Season still a little ways away, but media day for the Gophers. They have their own media day today, and then Big Ten media day is a couple weeks from now. And of course, big news this week with Pat Fitzgerald of Northwestern getting fired as part of the hazing scandal with the Wildcats football program. So Randy and I will talk about the Gophers, we'll talk about the Wildcats and Northwestern, and maybe get into a little recruiting talk as well, because that never takes a break. That is 24/7, 365. That is always on. And Randy will kind of catch you up on what's been happening with them and where their class of 2024 stands. Got to talk a little NBA at the end of the show, some rule changes that were approved that I think are pretty interesting. First, though, what did I miss? We've spent a lot of time on the Twins the last couple shows, maybe even the last few shows if you go back to last week. And it's gonna be a fair amount of baseball talk today, but of a different kind. Just some interesting reading, some interesting topics right now bubbling up because of the All-Star break, the All-Star game. Let's start with some Twin subjects. Two interesting stories from Star Tribune writer Bobby Nightengale Jr. You can find both of those, Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. I want to start with the first one, just a really nice piece on Pablo Lopez, Twins pitcher, who pitched a scoreless ninth inning in Tuesday's All-Star game. I'm not going to spend much time on the game itself because that game itself is, while interesting, while still the best of the All-Star games, it doesn't resonate with me maybe like it did when I was younger. But Pablo Lopez did pitch a scoreless ninth inning. The American League loses 3-2, National League snapping a long All-Star game losing streak, winning that game 3-2. But just an interesting story from Bobby on Pablo Lopez and just his relationship with his father. His father died 3 years ago yesterday, so the 3-year anniversary of his father passing due to a heart attack was on the day that he pitched in the All-Star game. Just a really nice story from Bobby on Pablo Lopez, and just his backstory, his growing up, how his parents were both in medicine. His dad is a doctor, and his dad unfortunately passing from a heart attack 3 years ago yesterday. But Pablo Lopez started first grade when he was 5 years old, graduated from high school when he was 16 in their native Venezuela. And just, a really, really, sounds like a really, really, not just smart guy, but a really thoughtful guy who's really channeled some of that energy into baseball. Had to make a decision at a certain point on whether he wanted to go to medical school or whether he wanted to play professional baseball. So I would just suggest you go and read it. I opened up I guess it was my browser this morning. I opened it up not intending to necessarily read that piece, but I got drawn into it. I read it in full, and I think you should too, because I think it was a really nice piece from Bobby on that. Now, also it was interesting. Also at the All-Star break, Commissioner Rob Manfred gave some thoughts, gave some talks. The game was in Seattle, and one of the things that came up was, of course, baseball's ongoing battle to have their games shown more widely. The Twins right in the middle of that with Bally Sports North and Diamond Sports, the parent company. Rob Manfred gave some of the more extended comments on this subject than I've seen on the record, at least for a while. So I'm reading again from Bobby's story. Manfred was asked if the league would join the bidding for different broadcast rights when they came up, and he said, quote, "Bidding is a funny word." He said, quote, "We will be available for teams that are looking for an alternative to the arrangement they are coming out of, or if they find themselves in a situation where there is not a bidder." So, I mean, that parsing that in plain English, basically, the latter where there's not a bidder, that's basically the Padres situation where they had to take over broadcast rights in the middle of this season when Diamond Sports renounced those rights. And by all accounts, that has been going pretty well. I'll get to that in a minute here. But the other, obviously, is an alternative to the arrangement they are coming out of, and that speaks perhaps to the Twins. Their contract with Diamond Sports ends at the end of this season. Now, there was some question in the middle of this season when Diamond Sports skipped a payment when they went to bankruptcy court trying to get their money as to whether Diamond was going to pay in full and keep that contract going. They did, in fact, do that. Of course, we reported that a couple weeks ago. So now the question becomes, what happens at the end of this season when a 12-year agreement between Diamond Sports and the Twins ends? Now, that it sounds like Major League Baseball is saying, we'll be there for you, essentially. That sounds a little different than MLB is trying to gobble up as many rights as possible, so I don't know if that's changed or not, because I thought that was the narrative that was being put in place before, but that's what Rob Manfred is saying right now. And talking about San Diego, he's saying, and just what they would do in other markets if they took over broadcast rights. Basically they struck deals with a bunch of streaming and digital and cable and satellite providers, and they're selling also a direct-to-consumer package of Padres games for $19.99 a month. And Manfred gave some details saying that subscriptions to that are, quote, well into the five figures. But let's parse the dollars and cents on that. Let's say for a full year that was $20,000. Now that's pretty small, right? Because we're talking about something that happened 6 weeks ago. So I would imagine in another market there would be more subscribers than well into the five figures if they had a chance to roll this out, had a chance to kind of plan it, things like that. But let's just say the Padres have sold 20,000 direct-to-consumer direct-to-consumer subscriptions at $19.99 a month, and let's say that's that was going to be for the last basically 3-4 months of the baseball season. I think it was 4 months. So let's say they're making $80 off of 20,000 people. That's not much money. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's barely. It's like $1.5 million. That is not enough to offset some of the differences that you're probably going to see between what the contracts are worth to show these games, through the more traditional means and now. So, what baseball, what streaming companies, or what Diamond Sports needs to figure out with Bally Sports if they're going to keep this is how to get that number up, how to boost that number enough so it offsets the difference between what you're making from the bundle, the traditional cable or satellite bundle, and what you're making, what you're losing from shedding all those subscribers. So that's still the financial piece that's not really clear. But Manfred did say it's a pretty much stock formula for us. What we've done in San Diego is whatever we can generate in terms of revenue in the traditional cable bundle, and whatever we can sell in terms of in-market subscriptions. That's the revenue that would be made available to the club. We think we can provide a viable local media alternative to clubs. So, I just think it's interesting. He's saying our goal from the beginning has been to make a transition from the current situation into a new model that did two things. Number one, increase the availability of our games to fans, and number two, minimize any financial disruption for clubs. So whether they can do that is a big question, and it's kind of sort out how this looks in the future. Bobby made a good point that I've made too, that any renewing of a contract with Diamond Sports, with Bally Sports North for the Twins would almost certainly have to include streaming rights through the Bally Sports Plus app. So even if the Twins stayed on Bally Sports, I would have to imagine in 2024 that there would be a option to buy a standalone product, to buy just Twins games for a fixed cost, perhaps that $19.99 a month that they're talking about with doing with the Padres, because you cannot go back into the situation where it's not available to fans who have cut the cord or who have decided who they don't want the full cable package, the full satellite package, because that's just not how people are consuming. Not everybody, but it's not how some people are consuming their sports and their media these days. So still a lot to unpack from all this, but some interesting comments from the commissioner, and I think you will find that interesting in addition to that Pablo Lopez story in Star Tribune and StarTribune.com today. One more item of interest before we get to Randy Johnson, by the way. Sounds like Major League Baseball players want to tweak the pitch clock before they get to the postseason. Rob Manfred saying, we kind of like the way it's going right now. They want to tweak it for the postseason, players do. Maybe, add a timeout here and there, add some time here and there. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this. AJ Przinsky and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I'm not necessarily opposed to some modification for postseason games, allowing and understanding that these games are magnified, that sometimes you need extra time to gather yourself, things like that. What I don't want is for this to just be to descend back into the kind of baseball that we got used to watching the last several years, where the game was just a slow slog, in the postseason and regular season both. So if they can figure out something very minor that would help the game, give it a little space, I guess, in the postseason, not add, a lot of time to games, but give it maybe a little bit of extra, chance to breathe, as we like to say. Maybe there could be something there, but if they can't come to some sort of compromise or figure out what that thing is, I would rather them just keep this in place, keep doing what they're doing. If they have to go back in 2024 and say, you know what, hey, the postseason, we do need to do something different, then maybe you try that. But I don't know. That's interesting to me that players are already lobbying or asking for something different for the postseason. We'll see if that comes to fruition, and that piece is interesting to me as well.
MGM Wine & Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to mgmwineandspirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine & Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
I want to bring on college football, Gophers football reporter Randy Johnson from the Star Tribune right now. Randy is graciously taking a little time off from well-earned vacation to join me here today. Randy, one of the big stories in college sports right now, even sports in general, maybe gaining even more legs in a week where there's not as much going on with baseball and the All-Star break. There's no NFL really news going on right now. I think it's going to be big news regardless, though. Pat Fitzgerald, longtime Northwestern football coach, fired yesterday as part of his allegations into hazing within the program, whether how much he knew or should have known. As you've, maybe followed this a little bit from a distance, like I said, because you've been off a little bit, but what do you make of this and kind of how this, impacts the landscape of the Big Ten?
Yeah, it sure came as a surprise. Pat Fitzgerald, very well-regarded coach in the Big Ten. Great player, Hall of Fame player, the linebacker for Northwestern, and then he takes over the head coaching job when Randy Walker died of a heart attack 17 years ago. So, he did an outstanding job there on the field, getting Northwestern into 2 Big Ten title games in 2018 and 2020. They'd fallen off last couple tough years. But yeah, it's surprising that this happened to him. Maybe not as surprising that there's something like this going on in college football. There's always, it seems like things bubble up in different programs over the time. But I just, from my first thoughts, it was kind of like that scene from the movie The Fugitive when Tommy Lee Jones gets to the train wreck site, and it's my, what a mess.
Yeah. I mean, you just read the allegations or read what, has seemingly been corroborated by multiple players and just kind of what was going on there. It definitely, it's always interesting in these types of stories to kind of sort out what the coach knew, what was implied that he or she, and, in this case, he should have known. That's probably the hardest thing sometimes, I think, to kind of sort out, is kind of this institutional control idea of how much should a coach know about everything going on in the program? How much does a coach intentionally or willfully not know? And how much of that blame should go on, the top of the line when, I guess we don't know exactly what he knew in this case, but that piece of it is always interesting to me. Like, where should the blame lie in cases like this?
Yeah, it's tough. Coaches have to have their ear to the ground all the time. I think they have to trust their assistant coaches and trust the leadership group with the players to, let them know what's going on now. And then this sure sounds like this is something that's been going on for a while. Usually those type of hazing traditions are passed down over years, and it's one of those things where sometimes you got to take a step back and let's look at what are we doing here? Why are we doing this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes at an interesting time in Northwestern's football evolution. Like you said, they've been to a couple title games, Big Ten title games fairly recently, but the last 2 years they've been really bad. And you do wonder, the cynical part of you wonders if some of the on-field performance makes this decision a little bit easier. Although I think this is probably a decision that stands on its own. But they're trying to get all sorts of like new facilities built. You were telling me before we started recording, like they're trying to build something with the football team, a refurbishing of some football facilities that's going to cost like close to $1 billion. Like I could not believe that number.
Yeah, $800 million for a replacement for Ryan Field there on campus, and that might be on hold. There today came out ESPN reporting that 6 faculty members they want the report released. Northwestern's a private school, and they haven't released the full report on this, and their thought is that okay, let's put this stadium thing on hold until we clear all this up. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, it's a situation where the coach, even if he say he didn't know, he still has to know.
Yeah,
still responsible.
TJ Fleck strikes me as a coach who wants to and knows pretty much everything that's going on with his program. Is that a fair assessment of the Gophers coach?
I would think so. I mean, he's always, he's always stressed the culture of the team, since he first got here. Now it's, you don't know everything that goes on with the team, so it's we get a slice of it. We don't get the full picture,
right?
So you can never say never, I guess, on that everything that's going on.
Yep. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm sure this is going to be percolating. It's going to be the big talker. I think Big Ten Media Day is just a couple of weeks away. Now, maybe we can transition to the conference at large as we kind of think about it, and maybe a little bit of Gophers recruiting here before we go. But I mean, it's a ways off. We're still, camp is not imminent, but with Media Day just a couple weeks away, Gophers are doing a thing this week where they're making some players available. Like we're starting to think about these things again. As we think about the conference, think about storylines, I imagine this is going to dominate a lot of the discussion in late July, even though it'll be, a couple weeks after the fact by that point.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, that's every coach will get asked about it during those 2 days in India on the 26th and 27th. Yeah, it seems like every year there's something that's going on in the summer. Last year was the USC UCLA edition to the Big Ten. A couple years back, it was Urban Meyer and the whole handling of the wide receiver coach situation. So there's always seems like there's some big national storyline that breaks out before our Big Ten Media Days.
What do you imagine the Gophers' storylines will be from a national perspective this season? Is it kind of a program still trying to like break into that next tier? Is it what do you think is the national lens on the team you cover?
I think it's a look at what can this team do now that they're transitioning from a Tanner Morgan, Mohamed Ibrahim. Has this program, has that foundation moved it up? They've got in the last 3 full seasons, an 11-win season, 11-win year, and 2 9-win campaigns. Now they haven't been able to break free and get to that Big Ten title game. That's something obviously they're aiming for. That's something that's kind of that'd be a prove it step, and I think that's nationally what people are looking for. We'll know a lot more about this program and how much it has grown if they can with a tougher schedule this year than last, especially if they can produce that type of record, we'll know that it has grown to a point where it is a contender annually.
And how much does that schedule impact them? Because not just this year, but going forward with the addition of UCLA and USC in a couple of years, with kind of eliminating some of these built-in edges that I think the West had for a while. How do you think they compete now with that kind of going forward?
Well, if they want to win get in the Big Ten title game and get with a chance to win it, they're going to have to take a step up, because you're probably looking at to make that title game, you'll probably have to have 1 loss or 2 at the very most. in the West, teams have been able to get away with it with 3 losses even, and so it's the margin of error will be less, and with you won't be playing against only a West schedule now. They're getting rid of the divisions after this year, so it's you'll get more often. You might get in Michigan and Ohio State in the same year as they are this year.
Yeah, the non-conference slate is pretty decent this year. They go to North Carolina, close circuit to you and everybody listening. I'm actually going to that game. I have a good friend who lives in North Carolina. We've booked my flight. I'm going to go out there and check that one out just as for personal attendance. But that should be fun. I mean, it's a pretty good schedule if you are a fan of Gopher football.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a nice destination. I think it'll have good turnout. I think it'll be probably similar to Colorado a couple years ago, where there was a very good turnout for Gophers fans.
Couple things for you, Randy, before I let you go. One of them, recruiting, it never stops, and they've had some pretty good gains this spring and summer. Where are they right now with class of the next class 24 and beyond?
I think they're pretty much set. I think they would take they might take another player, if something comes up that. But it seems to me like they're pretty much set. They did get 7 of the top 9 in the state. The couple got away. The Rogers defensive end, Wyatt Gilmore, and then who's going to Oklahoma, and the Irondale offensive lineman Emerson Mandel, who's going to Wisconsin. But overall, a very good recruiting year in Minnesota for the Gophers.
Yeah, it was. I agree with that. Well, that's laying the foundation. I mean, there's kind of recruiting we pay so much attention. It's like it's like drafts in some leagues where you hear the names and you rank everybody, and then it's 3 or 4 years until we really know how much these classes have an impact. But you got to keep recruiting well to have these chances. This is going to be an interesting year, I think, for them, the Gophers in general. Just like you said, transitioning from some offensive known commodities that have been here for a long time. Like, didn't you say on one podcast that like PJ Fleck hasn't coached a year that Tanner Morgan wasn't here?
Yeah, correct. Yep, that's exactly.
That's amazing. So we'll see.
Coming off injury, Chris Ottman-Bell. This will be his 7th year.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Like so many people still around, still here, but kind of transitioning to that next wave. How does this team fare? Where do they stand? How much has PJ Fleck built this program up to the point where they can be competitive? Well, a lot of those questions still to be answered. I'm sure you will start to sort a lot of that out in August and especially in September and beyond. Randy, go back to vacation. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mike.
I always enjoy catching up with Randy. I felt bad about calling him off of vacation for a little while, but he didn't seem to mind. He said it would keep his mind sharp, keep him back in football mode for a little while. I don't think Randy ever fully leaves football mode anyway, so appreciate his time and just taking a sneak peek at some power rankings in the Big Ten. I see the Gophers kind of in the upper half in a lot of them, like a USA Today, ESPN, Football Power Index. Looks like they're around 6th in a lot of these out of the 14 current teams in the Big Ten. So, maybe we can set some expectations for this team that they are going to be competitive and that maybe they can continue this kind of progress and momentum they've started over the last few years under PJ Fleck. But a lot of it, like Randy and I talked about, how do they transition on offense from a lot of these known commodities to now new quarterback, new running back, figuring out wide receiver, things like that. A lot of those skill positions are going to be in flux. Can they kind of reinvent themselves with a new cast of characters in 2023? That is going to be an interesting storyline to follow throughout this season.
Time to check my social media, yeah. To see who loves me online. Hashtag blessed life.
Okay, that sound means it's time to run a few of your questions. I got a bunch of them to get through. Let's do 3 of them today, and I think they're actually funny enough. I think they're all baseball questions. These have been stacking up for a while. Listener Chuck wants to know, you stated Matt Wallner went to Mississippi State to play baseball. This was a while ago on a show I did. He said, my question is, what is the equivalent of college baseball to playing in the minors? Let's use a team like Mississippi State or Florida. Would it be Class A, Double A, Triple A? What are your thoughts? Thanks. That's an interesting question. I've never really tried to quantify that. I don't know if you quite can, because there are many different kind of levels of college baseball, different kind of flavors of program. But I would say maybe the elite of the elite college baseball, and he's talking about, Mississippi State, Florida, some of the very best programs, maybe LSU, throw them in there. The teams that are competing for, to be in the tournament, to be in the regionals, to be in the College World Series every year. I would say that level. I mean, some of these guys go pretty quick from college baseball to the majors. So I would say it's like at least high Class A, if not Double A, at a lot of these programs. I mean, not all these guys are going to be on Double A teams or get drafted right away, but a lot of these guys do advance pretty quick through the minors when they're drafted from college. So I'm going to say like the very top programs, if you're talking about that competition, might be the equivalent of Double A baseball. And that's just me kind of parsing out what I've seen over the years and things like that. I'm hardly a college baseball expert, but that's kind of where it seems to me, based on where a lot of these draft picks come in, what the level is. Maybe high A, but maybe some of these double A is probably the top that I would say that we're dealing with here. So hope Chuck, that answers your question. Interesting question, something I'd never thought about. James wants to know, this was a podcast from a couple weeks ago when I was talking about Twins management and decisions on signing players to extended contracts. Since signing a 5-year contract after the 2019 season, Max Kepler has been awful. Then they signed Correa and Pablo Lopez, and they've been awful. I would argue Pablo Lopez has not been awful. He's actually been pretty good, but that's, he's an all-star this year. Some of his peripheral numbers are excellent. More. He said there's more instances that might provide fodder for future podcasts. He was criticizing a decision they made over the weekend too. This is a while ago, where they had players unavailable. He's saying both these things led me to question the team, front office, and management. Also, maybe time for the Twins ownership to question it as well. Now that's interesting, because this email, this is from a while ago. This is from about a month ago, when the Twins were, struggling a little bit, but I think they were still in first place at that point. And now we are starting to see management maybe starting to question some of these things. We've referenced Jim Souhan's column from a few days ago a couple of different times, where he talked to Joe Pohlad, the new Pohlad in charge, and Joe might not be as patient as some of his predecessors with the Twins, and just kind of an interesting, kind of saying, if things don't improve, how long will you stick with this? And maybe he's not of the mind that you stick with this quite as long as some of the other people in charge have been. So that's interesting to me, that this, that maybe ownership is taking a look at some of these things, and maybe is kind of wondering, hey, are these decisions that are being made, some of these things referenced by our listeners, if those are the things that they are going to look at as well. Okay, last one from Steve. Said, I have a quick question which I haven't heard anyone ask. Why didn't the Twins trade away Byron Buxton and keep Luis Arias? Arias is a hard worker, consistent, nothing against Buxton, but if he's not hurt, they're giving him the day off. Flashes of brilliance, but I'll take consistency. It's tough for me to understand. Maybe you can explain why. I'd say get rid of Buxton. He's dragging us down. Steve, I think the same things you see about Byron Buxton are maybe the same things other teams see, and a lot of these trades, especially with a team like the Marlins, which the Twins dealt with, come down to financials. Byron Buxton is making, $15 million a year, something like that, on his most recent contract. I don't think the Marlins are interested in an injury-prone player on that kind of contract. Arias is making $6 million this season, and he has 2 more seasons where he is arbitration eligible before he hits free agency in 2026. So finances are a consideration. The Twins were actively looking to trade Arias in their search for pitching, and I don't think they were actively looking to trade Buxton, who they consider more of a cornerstone player. But it's a fair question. Were they targeting the right player to trade? Because I think it does go back a little bit to philosophy on this team. Arias, not really a power hitter, doesn't necessarily have a position. I think they're worried about his health long term, but the fact that they stress power over, batting average so much these days, that to me does leave them vulnerable to maybe some miscalculations. So I think ultimately, though, they were looking to trade Arias. They weren't looking to trade Buxton, and teams were looking to acquire a player like Arias because of his contract situation, and frankly, because he was the AL batting champion last year. That is a commodity that brings value, whereas someone like Buxton is a little bit more speculative, probably has more value to the Twins than any other team. Let's finish with the cooler. Thanks, everybody, for the questions. By the way, submit them if you want to. Email me. Find me on Twitter. Find me on Threads now. We gotta be on all the social media. I'm enjoying being on Threads. I am at Randball on the new Threads app. So if you want to find me there, submit a question there. Go for it. But let's finish with the cooler here. Some interesting stuff. Some rule changes in the NBA that got approved earlier this week. Coaches will now have an additional challenge. I like this rule. They've only had one challenge since they instituted this new system a while back. They will have two now, provided that the first challenge they make is successful. They will retain that challenge and have a second challenge. I think that's a great rule. Everybody's been pushing for this for a while. It was basically unanimously approved by all these different groups and said that's great. The other rule is that if you flop, if you pretend like you got knocked down, or if you pretend like you're trying to take a charge, something like that, you will be assessed a technical foul and the other team will get a free throw next season. I like that too. Let's see how that goes. Let's see if this gets flopping out of the game a little bit more. If it costs you a point in game, maybe that will stop some of this nonsense where players look like they're shot out of a cannon when people barely touch them. Refs will be able to go back and take a look at it. I like it. I like these rules. Good job, NBA. Start trying to stay at the forefront of the game and make this better to watch for fans and make this easier for head coaches to navigate when calls don't go their way. That will do it for me today. Probably some more NBA talk on Thursday's show. Planning to have Chris Hine from the Star Tribune on to give you the latest on NBA free agency, what the Timberwolves have been up to, what things are looking like from that standpoint. So stick around for that on Thursday. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. We'll talk to you then.